During the Second World War, Japan, despite its relatively limited industrial capacity, managed to produce a considerable number of tanks. Unlike other major powers, Japanese tank design focused on lightweight vehicles with modest armor and armament. While this made them less capable in direct combat against heavier opponents, it also made them well suited for the jungles and rough terrain of Southeast Asia and the Pacific, where mobility mattered more than protection. The Imperial Japanese Army, or IJA, also explored a wide range of specialized variants, adapting its tanks for roles such as engineering support, bridge laying, and amphibious operations. Among these efforts was a more limited attempt to develop a mobile, tank-based, self-propelled anti-aircraft system. This concept eventually led to the creation of an experimental vehicle armed with a 20mm gun and an armored turret, known as the Taisei. The most common light anti-aircraft guns used by the Japanese forces were in the 20 to 25mm range. There was little interest in developing larger caliber weapons as they were not considered necessary for the threats the army was expected to face. Work on these lighter guns began in the early 1930s, eventually leading to the development of the 20mm Type 98, which was officially adopted in 1938 and entered production a year later. This gun would go on to become by far the most common Japanese anti-aircraft gun of the war, though its performance left a lot to be desired. Despite being a lightweight weapon, transporting it over long distances proved problematic. The primary issue stemmed from the Japanese decision to use wooden wheels. While these were cheaper and conserved rubber, they made the gun poorly suited for towing by motor vehicles. That said, these weapons were often deployed in areas where vehicles struggled to operate anyway. Instead, they were usually moved using draft animals, or soldiers had to pull them manually. In an attempt to address the issue, Japanese forces sometimes mounted these anti-aircraft guns on light truck beds, although it is unclear how widespread this practice was. They also experimented with installing such weapons on half-track chassis, but these efforts were either carried out in small numbers or remained at the prototype stage. In either case, neither option offered sufficient mobility over rough terrain. A fully tracked chassis provided a clear advantage over both, allowing the vehicle to traverse ground that wheeled or half-tracked vehicles struggled to navigate. Additionally, using a tank as a base came with the added benefit of improved armored protection. Thus, IJA officials decided to explore whether such a vehicle could be developed using an existing tank chassis. Unfortunately, because the Japanese self-propelled anti-aircraft vehicles are generally poorly documented in English-language literature, very little is known about them. One of the first known attempts to build such a vehicle appears to have used a modified chassis based on the light Type 97 Teikei. More specifically, it was an effort to create a self-propelled platform capable of mounting different types of weapons. The design featured an elongated Type 97 chassis with an additional road wheel connected to a rear idler via a leaf spring suspension, along with a new open-top superstructure. Two proposed configurations included mounting either a 37mm anti-tank gun or a 20mm Type 98 anti-aircraft gun. The latter variant was fairly simple in its overall design. The entire gun, along with its three-legged platform, was simply bolted onto the new chassis. The two wooden wheels were retained at the rear of the vehicle. In this configuration, both the gun and its crew were completely exposed, which was a significant drawback. Surviving photographs suggest that at least two such vehicles were built, but the project was ultimately not pursued any further. One of the main issues with the earlier Teikei-based concepts was that the modified chassis itself had never been adopted for service. As a result, the IJA needed to find a more practical and readily available chassis. Additionally, they had to develop a solution that offered better protection for the crew. To address this, they turned to the Type 98 Ken-Ni light tank, which had originally been designed to supplement and eventually replace the Type 95 Ha-Go light tank then in service. Compared to its predecessor, the Type 98 Ken-Ni featured a more simplified and streamlined superstructure. Development of the tank began in 1938 with a working prototype constructed that same year. Actual production was delayed and didn't begin until 1942, by which point the tank was already obsolete. With the chassis issue resolved, engineers then faced the challenge of protecting the crew. The original 20mm anti-aircraft gun had been designed as a lightweight weapon and lacked any form of armored shield. Rather than retrofitting one, the Japanese opted to develop a dedicated turret that offered all-around protection, albeit with an open top. It is unclear exactly when the development of this turret began. The project either started in late 1941 at some point during 1942 or possibly as late as 1943. In much of the Western literature, this vehicle is designated as the Type 98 Taisei. On the other hand, Japanese sources refer to it as the Experimental Anti-Aircraft Tank Taisei. For the sake of simplicity, we're calling it the Taisei. Perhaps unsurprisingly, very little is known about this vehicle, as the overall characteristics and design details of the Taisei are not well documented in available sources. However, thanks to a few surviving photographs, we can make some educated guesses about its layout and features. The chassis can be divided into clear sections. At the front, it featured a fully enclosed front-mounted transmission. To allow access to the transmission, 2 hatch doors were installed on the front glacis. Behind this was the crew compartment, followed by the engine compartment at the rear. The Taisei was powered by a Mitsubishi Type 100 6-cylinder air-cooled diesel engine, producing about 130 horsepower. The original Type 98 Kenii, weighing around 7.2 tons, could reach speeds of up to 50 km per hour, or a little over 30 miles per hour. The Taisei anti-aircraft variant likely retained a similar weight, suggesting that its mobility and overall driving performance remained pretty much identical. The suspension system consisted of 3 bogies, each equipped with a pair of road wheels. In addition, there was a front drive sprocket, a rear idler, and 3 return rollers. The Taisei utilized a bell crank suspension system. This type of suspension featured bogies mounted on pivoting arms which were connected to a long, horizontally mounted helical compression spring located along the sides of the hull. As the tank moved over uneven terrain, the bogies would push against each other through this spring, allowing for articulation and shock absorption. Notably, on the Taisei, many of the suspension components were built into the interior of the chassis rather than externally, as seen on many other Japanese tanks. While this offered better protection for the suspension, it came at the cost of reduced internal space. The original Type 98 Kenii superstructure featured a simple design with angled sides constructed from both welded and bolted armor plates. The anti-aircraft variant based on this vehicle incorporated some notable modifications. Most notably, the side armor of the superstructure was extended, giving the vehicle flat sides. This was likely done to provide additional working space inside it, and possibly to accommodate storage for spare ammunition magazines. For some reason, War Thunder uses a prototype version of the Kenii as a base, which features a rounded hull. Installing the 20mm anti-aircraft gun inside the Type 98 Kenii's original small turret was just not feasible. Instead, the Japanese developed an entirely new turret design. This new turret was significantly larger and wider in order to provide sufficient working space for the crew. It also featured an open top, which improved visibility, reduced weight, and made it easier to load the gun. This was done from the top using long 20-round magazines. At the rear of the turret, there was an extension that served as ammunition storage. This extension included a small hatch at the top, accessible to the loader. At the front of the turret was an opening for the main armament. Only a small gun shield was fitted, leaving a noticeable gap in the turret's protection. The main armament was a single 20mm Type 98 anti-aircraft gun, a gas-operated automatic cannon. Weighing approximately 450 kilograms, or about 1,000 pounds, the towed gun was usually transported on 2 wooden wheels. When deployed, the wheels were removed and the gun was mounted on a 3-legged platform, like a tripod. The front leg of the platform doubled as a travel lock for the barrel during transportation. The gunner would sit on a specially designed seat positioned behind the weapon. Elevation was controlled using a hand wheel, while traverse was achieved uniquely by the gunner shifting his legs in the direction he wished to turn it, which was enabled by indents on either side of the seat. The gun was capable of firing several types of 20mm ammunition, including high-explosive tracer, high-explosive incendiary, and armor-piercing tracer rounds, the latter capable of penetrating around 30mm of flat armor at a distance of 250 meters. The gun had a maximum vertical range of 4.5 kilometers, or about 3 miles, though its effective operational range was closer to 1.7 kilometers, or about a mile. It was fed by a 20-round magazine mounted on top of the weapon. While the theoretical maximum rate of fire was 300 rounds per minute, the practical rate was more like 100 rounds per minute. The gun, when fully deployed, had a full 360-degree traverse, and elevation ranged all the way down to -10 degrees to up to 85. Unfortunately, there is no information that could shed light on the performance of the Tassei's gun when mounted in its intended turret configuration. Based on one of the available drawings, the gun appears to be connected to the tank by a front-mounted trunnion, likely integrated as part of the turret. Additionally, the drawing indicates that the gunner operated the weapon using a shoulder support system. The gun likely retained its maximum elevation, though it remains unclear whether the turret restricted its depression. One significant change would likely involve the gun's traverse mechanism. As previously mentioned, the 20mm gun was usually manually traversed by the gunner using his own legs, which would have been impractical inside of a tank. Therefore, it's likely that a hand-operated traverse mechanism was installed for the turret. The exact ammunition load capacity is also not known. The Tassei superstructure was protected by a maximum armor thickness of only 16mm, with the sides being slightly thinner at 12mm. It is unlikely that the turret protection was any thicker, and such thin armor would have provided only minimal protection, mainly against shrapnel and small caliber fire. Any larger caliber weapons or dedicated anti-tank armaments would have easily destroyed it. Although there is no specific information about the crew members, it is reasonable to assume the vehicle would have had at least three: a driver, loader, and a gunner. The driver would have been seated inside the hull of the vehicle. Inside the turret, the gunner was likely positioned behind the gun, with the loader seated to his right. In this configuration, the gunner likely also served as the commander. While the prototype offered good off-road mobility and featured light armor, which was still better than no protection at all, it was ultimately not adopted for production. The reasons for this are not really clear, but several factors may explain the decision. First, the chassis was based on the Type 98 Kenii, which was produced in very limited numbers. Most estimates placed production between 40 and 100. As a result, even if the design had been adopted, production would have likely remained slow. There were also issues with spare parts availability, making its deployment overseas impractical. Additionally, the prototype was equipped with just a single 20mm anti-aircraft gun, which, by the later stages of the war, was considered insufficient. There may have also been mechanical issues with the design, although such problems are not documented in available sources. Despite the initial prototype not being adopted, the Japanese continued development and produced a new prototype armed with two 20mm anti-aircraft guns mounted on the same chassis. This time, there was no fully enclosed turret. Instead, the crew was protected by folding sidewalls and a forward-mounted gun shield. However, this version was also not adopted for service, likely at least in part due to the choice of chassis. This concludes our video on the Japanese experimental anti-aircraft tank Tassei. What do you think about this attempt to create a motorized and armored self-propelled anti-aircraft vehicle based on a light tank chassis? Do you enjoy playing it in War Thunder? Let us know in the comments below. If you haven't done so already, we invite you to subscribe to stay updated on future content. If you'd like to contribute further, consider Patreon, PayPal, or our sister channel, Plain Encyclopedia. Your contributions help us create more engaging videos. As always, we'd like to especially thank our medium and heavy tank Patreon supporters: Dan Fitzpatrick, Dave Shuford, Owen M., R. Rob, and Sopwith21. Your generous contributions help fund our research, illustrations, and video production. Until next time, keep us in your sights.